The American Revolution, a seismic event in world history, wasn't a sudden eruption of rebellion, but rather a gradual, complex process of escalating tensions and shifting loyalties, culminating in 13 British colonies, declaring independence and ultimately forging a new nation. To understand why the colonies broke free, it's crucial to examine the political, economic, and ideological undercurrents that shaped their relationship with Great Britain throughout the 17th and 18th centuries. Initially, the colonies were founded for a variety of reasons: religious freedom, economic opportunity, and political independence, often with a significant degree of self-governance granted by the British Crown, a policy known as salutary neglect. This period of relative autonomy fostered a spirit of self-reliance and local control, with colonists establishing their own representative assemblies, such as the Virginia House of Burgesses, to manage local affairs, legislate, and levy taxes. However, the situation began to change dramatically in the mid-18th century, particularly after the French and Indian War, 1754 to 1763. A costly conflict fought between Great Britain and France for control of North America. While Britain emerged victorious, the war left it deeply in debt, and the British government, under Prime Minister George Grenville, believed the colonies should contribute to the cost of their own defense. This shift in policy marked the beginning of a series of acts passed by Parliament aimed at raising revenue from the colonies, fundamentally altering the long-standing relationship between Britain and its American possessions. The colonists' cry of no taxation without representation encapsulated their fundamental objection to being taxed by Parliament without having elected representatives to voice their interests. This principle was rooted in the British tradition of representative government, and the colonists' belief that they were entitled to the same rights and liberties as British citizens residing in Great Britain. In response to the Stamp Act, colonists organized boycotts of British goods, formed groups like the Sons of Liberty to protest and enforce the boycotts, and convened the Stamp Act Congress in 1765 to petition the King and Parliament for redress. Facing economic pressure from the boycotts, Parliament repealed the Stamp Act in 1766, but simultaneously passed the Declaratory Act, asserting its absolute authority to legislate for the colonies in all cases whatsoever. This act served as a warning to the colonists that Parliament would not relinquish control and foreshadowed future conflicts over the extent of British authority. The Townshend Acts of 1767 imposed duties on various imported goods, such as glass, lead, paint, paper, and tea, further escalating tensions and sparking renewed colonial resistance. Colonists responded with another wave of boycotts, non-importation agreements, and increased smuggling, challenging British attempts to enforce the new duties. The presence of British troops in Boston, sent to maintain order and enforce the Townshend Acts, further inflamed tensions, culminating in the Boston Massacre on March 5, 1770, when British soldiers fired on a crowd of colonists, killing 5 personer. Though the exact circumstances of the event remain contested, the Boston Massacre was widely publicized by colonial leaders, such as Samuel Adams, as a symbol of British tyranny and oppression. Parliament partially repealed the Townshend Acts in 1770, but retained the tax on tea, a symbolic assertion of its authority and a continuing point of contention. The Tea Act of 1773, designed to bail out the financially struggling British East India Company, granted the company a monopoly on the tea trade in the colonies, further angering colonial merchants and fueling fears of British economic control. In response, colonists organized the Boston Tea Party on December 16, 1773, when a group of colonists disguised as Native Americans dumped 342 chests of tea into Boston Harbor, a bold act of defiance against British authority. the British government responded harshly to the Boston Tea Party, enacting the Intolerable Acts in 1774, a series of punitive measures aimed at punishing Massachusetts and asserting British control over the colonies. These acts included the closure of Boston Harbor, the imposition of martial law in Massachusetts, the Quartering Act requiring colonists to provide housing and supplies for British troops, and the Massachusetts Government Act curtailing colonial self-governance. The Intolerable Acts galvanized colonial resistance and led to the convening of the First Continental Congress in Philadelphia in September 1774, where delegates from 12 of the 13 colonies met to discuss their grievances and coordinate a response to British policies. The First Continental Congress issued a Declaration of Rights and Grievances, asserting colonial rights and liberties, and adopted a non-importation agreement to boycott British goods, aiming to pressure Britain to repeal the Intolerable Acts. However, the British government refused to concede, and tensions continued to escalate, culminating in the battles of Lexington and Concord on April 13, 1775, marking the beginning of the American Revolutionary War. The Second Continental Congress convened in Philadelphia in May 1775, assuming the role of a national government in establishing the Continental Army, appointing George Washington as its commander-in-chief. Initially, the colonists sought reconciliation with Britain, but as the war progressed and British intransigence became apparent, the movement for independence gained momentum. Thomas Paine's pamphlet, Common Sense, published in January 1776, powerfully articulated the case for independence, arguing that it was only logical for the colonies to break free from British rule. The pamphlet was widely read and disseminated throughout the colonies, swaying public opinion in favor of independence and paving the way for a formal declaration. On July 4th, 1776, the Second Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence, declaring the 13 colonies independent from Great Britain and outlining the principles of self-government, individual rights, and popular sovereignty. The Declaration of Independence, penned primarily by Thomas Jefferson, drew upon Enlightenment ideals, such as those of John Locke, and articulated a powerful vision of a nation founded on the principles of liberty, equality, and self-determination. The Declaration not only announced the colony's independence, but also presented a compelling argument for universal human rights, including the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The American Revolution was not merely a political struggle for independence, but also a social and ideological upheaval that transformed the relationship between government and the governed. The war itself was a long and arduous struggle, marked by numerous battles, sacrifices, and hardships, but ultimately, the colonists, with the aid of foreign allies, such as France, prevailed. The Treaty of Paris, signed in 1783, formally recognized the independence of the United States of America and established its boundaries, marking the end of the American Revolutionary War and the birth of a new nation.